When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be talking about Kevan Lannister, the overlooked Lannister, and kind of his whole life, and what kind of made him tick, and who he was, and why he ended up having to be killed by Varys so that Aegon could end up taking over King's Landing and doing all that stuff. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow and make sure people might like this content as well. Now, Kevan Lannister was the second son of Tytos Lannister, and was someone that was very close to his older brother Tywin, that we know in the story is kind of one of the main figures and all that stuff. But Tywin was very trusting of Kevan and was the person that he trusted the most. He was kind of like this very lieutenant to Tywin, right? If we look at something like a Gandalf to Aragorn thing early on in the books of the Lord of the Rings, where we know that Gandalf is kind of in charge of what's going on, but Aragorn is someone that will kind of right the ship and do whatever Gandalf needs to happen. And that's kind of how I look at Tywin and Kevan. The relationship is Kevan Lannister is someone that is very loyal and very honor bound to Tywin and will kind of do what his older brother wanted to do. And this would kind of play out in their early lives when Tywin was kind of trying to take control of the Westerlands and kind of bring all these debts back and all that stuff. Kevan was someone that very much kind of was the person that was sent to get all these debts and stuff like that. And in the process, Kevan ends up finding his wife, and he ends up finding his wife, which is Dorna Swift, who is the daughter of Harris Swift that we see in the books, that is on the small council of Cersei and all that. And they end up falling in love and having 4 children. We will talk about these children a little bit later. So one of their children end up actually dying, and this is Willem. And then we also know that Lancel, who is the most prominent son that comes of their relationship, he is in the first 2 books very prominently in King's Landing. And Lancel kind of has a very bad path. We're not really going to talk about it, but Kevan, we very much see that he's unhappy with his children. They do not do the best job for him, especially Lancel. And Kevan Lannister is someone that, for the most part, is very much overshadowed by Tywin. Kevan is really always in the background, kind of just doing orders, being the second-hand command, leading parts of Tywin's armies, and doing all that stuff. And we really don't get to see Kevan Lannister come into full vision until after Tywin dies, and we kind of see how smart Kevan Lannister actually is. Now, Kevan Lannister also, throughout the wars and the years of service, also saves up a ton of gold, because Tywin was someone that always rewarded Kevan very well, and always made sure that his brother was well paid and stuff like that. And this is kind of how Lancel ends up getting, House Dairy and basically getting the lands of that as a reward for what happens on the Blackwater and all that stuff. And we kind of see how Kevan Lannister is a very smart individual, right? He has saved up all of this gold to where he's a very prominent figure at this point. He's very powerful. If he was to need to get some sell swords to buy him, he has the gold and he makes this well known. And we also know that Kevan Lannister is very smart, right? Kevan Lannister kind of puts it together that Jaime and Cersei were together and that this wasn't a lie and this was the truth. He says this as much to Cersei and Jaime. And what I think is even the smartest thing about Kevan Lannister is that he understands when his brother was right in Tywin. So we get this in Feast for Crows, where Cersei is kind of looking for this hand of the king, and she asks Kevan. Now, Kevan was willing to do this. He was willing to become regent and willing to become hand of the king, but only if Kevan gets to send Cersei back to Casterly Rock. Now, this makes complete sense, because Cersei has done almost nothing good in King's Landing. And Kevan Lannister wants to kind of put the shame of the Lannisters behind them and start to actually rule and make Tommen's leadership and rule very well, or very good. And Kevan, Cersei doesn't agree to this, of course. And Kevan actually gives Cersei some really good advice that I think is really key, and what I want to bring up in this video is that even when Kevan is really being kind of spurned and insulted, he still goes, if you want my honest opinion, if you don't want to make Mace Tyrell the Hand of the King, then choose Lord Rowan or Tarly. Now, what I think is very interesting here is if she does this, she could actually gain a possible ally in either one of these people over the Tyrells and kind of make some of Tyrell's bannermen more loyal to her because she is the one giving them power. And then also, Mace Tyrell can't really be angry because you're naming one of his bannermen to Hand of the King. And I think that is really smart from Kevan, and it shows you kind of how he thinks and how he has a lot of the same characters as Tywin. He was around Tywin for so long that he knows how Tywin would have played this. And we will see this later on when Kevan kind of comes into his own power and all that stuff. But it kind of shows you already how Kevan would have changed the small council, likewise of what Cersei ends up doing. Now, Kevan gets even more insulted, really, because Kevan is the person that should be the Warden of the West and kind of the person looking over Casterly Rock. He is not named either because Cersei is just stupid, and she thinks that Kevan is betraying the family. Maybe she's with the Tyrells, or he's with the Tyrells now. She's just stupid. And Kevan Lannister, he kind of has this thing where he goes and tries to set up Dairy for Lancel, and Lancel kind of throws it all away. And this is where Kevan, he just kind of continues to have the disappointment of his children, kind of like how Tywin did. They both share those same kind of similarities. And and Kevan for a while just kind of returns to Casterly Rock, and after all this kind of just goes that way. He kind of just doesn't want to help the family at this point anymore. He's just had enough, right? And that's kind of what we get for Kevan for a while. He is at Riverrun for a few days, and then he ends up, continuing on to Casterly Rock, like I said, into the Westerlands. But after Cersei is imprisoned, Harris and Pycelle send Kevan back and offer him the regency. This is a very smart move. It brings someone, really smart back into power, and someone that can start to undo what Cersei does. And this is what ends up kind of getting Kevan in trouble, because he starts doing such a great job, as we'll talk about in what he does in Dance with Dragons, that it actually kind of ends up getting him in trouble, right? Varys sees how well he's doing and ends up killing him. And we're going to talk about that right now, of what Kevan does once he actually has been given the power. Now, the first big thing Kevan understands and know he has to do is fix the Tyrell alliance, because right now the Tyrell alliance is on a very thin kind of line, because Cersei has at every stop kind of insulted them, has on purpose gotten Marjorie kind of into custody, and it kind of shows you how Kevan goes about doing this. So Kevan comes into being the Lord Protector and kind of is the person in charge at this point of the Regency over Tommen, and he makes Mace Tyrell the Hand of the King, Lord Pax Redwyne as Master of Ships, and Randall Tarly as the Master of Laws. This makes a lot of sense. All three of these would be pretty good. I don't think Mace Tyrell is actually a very good Hand of the King because he's not very smart, but it's something that trying to repair that alliance, and it's a very good move by Kevan. Now, Kevan also tells Cersei that she's going back. She's lost her power. She's never going to be in power again. She's going back to Casterly Rock and getting her as far away from King's Landing as possible. Now, Kevan also does a great job of trying to appease the High Sparrow and the Sparrows as a whole, where he sends, Osmond and Offred Kettleblacks to the dungeons and appeasing them because Cersei confesses to have slept with them both. And then also he tries to appease the High Sparrow, but in a way that they can get Cersei Lannister back and try to just get past this, right? And this was kind of inspired by what Tywin did to their father's mistress, right? Where they had this Walk of Atonement type thing, and this is what Cersei ends up doing, and that's how she's able to get out of the custody of the High Sparrow. And Kevan plans to kind of send her back and to start dealing with all these other issues. Now, the next part of what we see of what Kevan does is kind of looking at the situation of Westeros and preparing for the wars to come. Kevan talks about how they're going to deal with Jon Con and Aegon and their plans to get rid of them. And also he sends his good father, or, you know, not his actual father, but his father through his wife's side, Harris Swift, to Bravos to negotiate, you know, the financial problems of the crown. Again, a very smart move. Tywin always understood the financial issues that the crown faced, and that is a really good idea. If they can get the bank on their side, it's very good. They'll be able to get more soldiers and more support from the Iron Bank and all that. And that leads us into the supper that he has with Cersei and Tommen, kind of telling them what the future is going to look like and all that. And so we see what Kevan is kind of doing, right, where he's pretty much fixed a lot of Cersei's problems, right, where he still has these problems where the public perception of the crown is not great at this point, and the Sparrows being empowered, not great as well. But he's fixed the Tyrell Alliance. He's looking to fix a lot of the rebellions going on right now, and I believe he would have been able to put down Aegon and Jon Con if he had been able to live, which is kind of what leads us to Varys, right? Varys ends up killing Kevan, and that is the end of Kevan Lannister's life. But when you look at it from the point of view of Kevan Lannister was very, very good at what he was doing. He was someone that was very much like a Tywin, knowing what he had to do and get, you know, all this stuff done. And I think the world would have been a lot better if Kevan Lannister had been in power. And I don't think it would have mattered anyway. I think Daenerys would have came over and wanted to end up winning anyway. But I think personally, Kevan Lannister is a very intriguing figure because he has all the good characteristics of Tywin, but I also think he has other characteristics that make him a better person that could have been better than Tywin, because we see that Kevan is very much caring for his family and treats his sons and his daughter a lot better than Tywin did. So I think in that regard, Kevan would have been a better ruler than maybe Tywin would have. But let me know what you guys think on Kevan as a character, and what do you guys think of him? But Kevan, to me, is one of the best Lannisters as a person. He doesn't have a lot of the negative qualities of people like Tywin and Tyrion, and he doesn't have a lot of those negative qualities of also Jaime and Cersei, but he has a lot of all of their positive qualities. So something I wanted to talk about in this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.